We're all set now.
Okay. Welcome to everybody. This is Dr. Anthony Bernier. Today is Thursday, April 5th. It's the morning here on the West Coast, but I want to welcome you on behalf of myself and Dr. Lily Lua. We're both co-chairs of the Faculty Research Committee, who is generously sponsoring a very informal discussion today about grant seeking. We have two guests today with us, both expert grant seekers, Dr. Kristen Rebmann, who is an associate professor, and Dr. Sue Alman, who is a lecturer with the School of Information. And we have a few prompts that we will look at gradually throughout our conversation between now and the upcoming hour. What factors led you to consider? What made your proposal successful or un? What resources do you need or use? What campus supports or university supports have been or could be helpful? What do you find are the benefits of pursuing or receiving a research grant, and what drawbacks or liabilities do you encounter? So with those general topics floated, those general prompts floated, we're going to go to Dr. Alman first, who has a few prepared slides of a recent grant application that was successful with the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS. And then we'll go right into the questions with Dr. Rebmann joining the questions. So I'm going to now unshare, stop share, and have Sue pick up her slides.
Okay, just give me 1 minute here. Okay, can everybody see the first slide?
Looks like it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Anthony and Lily, for allowing Kristen and me the opportunity to talk about the grants. And Anthony did say not to do any slides, and so I was very bad and did not listen to him, but it just made it easier for me to just do a couple things so that you could see what I'm going to be talking about. And it's a little bit different because I am a 0.8, not full-time faculty, and I'm out of state. So that made some real differences in the proposal process. My process started back in December of 2016. I'd been thinking about a blockchain grant, but didn't really get going on it until December, and it was due on February 1st. So I got a working group very quickly together, comprised of individuals from these different organizations who helped me and Sandy decide what direction to take. We didn't know whether to do a planning grant or a national forum proposal. Turned out to be a national forum proposal. And some of the things that I did very quickly in December is I provided the advisory committee with all different types of resources about blockchain, gave them articles to read, different definitions that were in use, and we had a lot of online discussions in December because everything really shuts down pretty much the last 2 weeks of December, so I had to get their input and IMLS. We did decide on the Community Anchors program, and IMLS was very generous in providing comments in between Christmas and New Year's, the last week of December, so that I could move ahead and have a draft proposal for the advisory committee first part of January. The pre-proposal, and that's what this was, it was not the full proposal. You had to submit a pre-proposal to IMLS, and then they reviewed them over several months, and then they invited certain groups to submit a full proposal. So this pre-proposal went through extensive iterations with the advisory group and IMLS suggestions. The IMLS procedures were straightforward. They were available online, and I had the opportunity to discuss the project with the program officers at IMLS, who gave really helpful advice on how to make changes. The San Jose State University Research Foundation, and I didn't put in the acronym, but it's SJSU I've come to know that acronym quite extensively. I contacted them in early January and was connected to the sponsored programs manager for the College of Humanities and the Arts. So this was the pre-award person that I worked with all the way through until the grant was awarded. There are certain procedures that need to be followed if you want to request PI status if you're a part-time faculty. So that I was in that category. I had to follow those procedures. And then there's an entire campus review process that you have to go through before it can be submitted to the funding agency. So they provided me with a routing timeline chart. There are internal routing forms along with the draft proposal. And I had to have meetings with the SJSU program manager, the IMLS program officer, and the advisory committee. So there's a lot of going on, and I just went back through my email so that I could remember the process, and there are literally hundreds of email messages from the time this process started through now. So the pre-proposal was submitted to IMLS on February 1st. It was a 10-page maximum. And then we also included letters of recommendation from the advisory committee members. We included their personal information, bios, and vita. And there had to be a full budget that San Jose required that IMLS did not at that point. So that was needed to be done. Between February 1st and April 28th was the silent time. It was the pre-proposal review at IMLS. So I did prepare some things in the case that we would get the funding, but didn't really get the go-ahead to do anything until April 28th. When IMLS notified SJSU. Between April 28th and June 30th, I worked extensively with the advisory committee, with the IMLS program officer, and with the pre-award manager from San Jose. The post-award process changed everything. They switched managers, and I didn't understand that. It took me a while to figure out that I no longer worked with Ellen, that I was now working with Natalie. And so I put that in red because that was a really big deal. And once we got to this stage, the whole process changed. There were new procedures, new policies, and I just wanted to give you that background information till we come back to the questions that Anthony and Lily gave Kristen and I to discuss. So we can either use these questions, or Anthony, we can go back to your slide that is prettier.
Okay, well, why don't we do that? And then before we start digging in or playing with the questions, why don't we look to Kristen for some discussion about what she wanted to share, and then we can integrate the questions there.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll just provide some background information about the grant that I worked on and or am working on, and then we can jump into the questions. Okay, so like Sue, I also went after an IMLS grant. This was a project grant back in 2016, and we're in our second year. And then project. The project area is TV white space networking technology, which is a means of extending Wi-Fi into communities in new ways. Basically, it uses frequencies that were released by the FCC several years ago that can be adapted to extending library networks into the community up to 6 miles away. And so there's like an equipment component, the technology that allows TV white space to be used to propagate internet access. And there's the component of implementing the technology across several contexts. So with this project, I was actually approached, Sandy actually was approached by someone that was an early adopter of the technology. And Sandy kind of said to the faculty, is anyone willing or interested in working with this person? And I said, well, I'll talk to him. And it was a very informal process in terms of connecting with this person. And he told me his ideas, and we just started a very informal collaboration, and very quickly we decided to go after this grant. And a lot of the time in terms of gearing up for this project was finding appropriate partners, or partners that we thought would be attractive to IMLS and what their funding goals were. And so a big part of the process in terms of preparing the preliminary proposal for us, or for me, because I did a lot of the writing, most of the writing, and developing our ideas as a proposal, was to think about not only just how the partners could be framed in terms of the funding goals of IMLS as they've expressed in their digital platform and other documentation, and then also thinking about how the technology can be framed within the context of those documents as well. And so that was the bulk of our effort initially with the preliminary proposal, was to say, okay, this is why this technology is attractive to libraries. This is why libraries can become leaders in this area. And in fact, our proposal was libraries leading with TV whitespace technology. And I found that IMLS finds that really attractive in terms of wanting to invest in technologies that allow libraries to lead in their communities in strategic ways. Okay, so very similar to Sue, we ended up having about 4 partners. I was the PI, the sole PI on the project, and so I ended up, I guess, having 4 or 5 partners with that initial round. And like Sue, we found out in April to submit a full proposal. Now, our process with developing the full proposal, again, was bringing all of these partners on board to make sure that they were communicating what they were going to do. And so we had very clear, detailed plans for what we would be up to. And so one phase of our project was to have an online open course that raised awareness of the technology in the library community. And then one phase was to identify and engage in outreach to libraries, to have them to apply to become a pilot site or a sub-award site where they would receive money to install their own TV whitespace network. So after we went through that long process of selecting libraries, they implemented their networks. And so all of our sites have implemented their networks. We ended up choosing sites in Georgia, Nebraska, Maine, South Dakota, the Yakama Nation in Washington, and where's my final one? I think I said all of them. Yakama, Nebraska, South Dakota, Georgia, and Maine. And so they're in rural spaces. I won't spend too much time on the technology, but one of the advantages of TV whitespace for rural libraries is that there's less competition for access to TV whitespace frequencies. And so rural and small communities really shine in terms of implementing the technology because there's less competition for infrastructure. So I'll be traveling later this spring and early summer to all of my sites to go visit and see what they're up to, and begin some, develop analyses of just their data usage and what's going on and how they're doing. And then we'll be, so that is one phase. That's the phase that we happen to be in right now. And then our final phase is to really take those data sets that we collected and analyze them in publications and case studies and models, for example. And so I find that IMLS is very much interested in projects that allow, as I said, libraries to lead, and national models for best practice. And so, yeah, they're interested in TV white space, but they want to know how your project will allow libraries to lead nationally and maybe even internationally, and to disseminate a lot of your resource or what you've accomplished in the literature. And they love open access literature, and so they even ask you for a plan to publish in open access venues. So that's kind of where I am right now on that project. Maybe we should jump into the questions.
Too close?
Okay.
No, it's not.
These are, someone has their mic on with some audio in the background?
It will grow to be as big as this table.
A TV sound or a radio or something?
Maybe 4 in 100 years.
So these are the prompts that Lily and I discussed that would probably be of help in getting us started, but also be of general interest to people with who are interested.
Anthony, really quickly, I think it's Ruth's audio, and maybe if you, as a moderator, mute it, then some of that background noise will be minimized.
So I can mute a particular person's.
Yes.
I think.
Where's Debbie?
I'm
here, but you're right. I can't see who's a co-host. But
So how about now?
Yeah, it's gone. Lily, did you do something?
Yes, I did. So is everything okay now? I think I.
Sounds great now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Kristen. So these are the questions that we thought would be good prompting topics to discuss from both Sue and Kristen's discussion. It's important, I think, to note that both of them are talking about Institute of Museum and Library Services grants, IMLS grants. Those are federal grants. There are, of course, lots and lots of other different ways to apply for different grants, but these are two that are from IMLS. And so I'll just do a quick read through again, and then we can open up the mic again and see if people want to nominate starting with one or the other or ask other questions. So what factors led each of you to consider and then develop a research grant proposal in the first place? In both cases, I think the school was approached, if I may recall that correctly. Then
No, actually, ours, not for blockchain.
You initiated yours, okay.
Yes.
What made your proposal successful or unsuccessful? Both of these were obviously successful, but there may have been times in the pre-submission stage that you might have felt that you needed to work on something to make it from un to successful. What resources do you need or use during the assembly of the grant proposal process? What campus or university supports have been helpful? The research foundation was at least part of that. What do you find are the benefits for pursuing and receiving a research grant for yourself and for the school and for research in the field? And then, are there any drawbacks or liabilities that you've encountered or anticipate at this point? So either of our two speakers would be free to jump in for either of those, or we can ask people who are listening in the audience to nominate their own questions.
Sue, do you want to we can talk a little bit about each question. Do you want to go first on the first question?
Sure, and I think that's a good way.
Okay.
We'll go down through it. I had been hearing so much about blockchain, mostly due to the course that I teach on the emerging future technology issues and trends, but it's out there in the literature, it's being talked about. And I had thought, after hearing someone talk about blockchain at the South by Southwest Festival, that you could use it for credentialing. And I thought that libraries would be the perfect organization to validate and to organize people's credentials. And if that may be unfamiliar to you, because there are so many people getting credit and not for credit courses, they want to keep it in one place and have a full credential that they can take with them to future employers or if they're going on for more formal education. And blockchain allows all of these credentials to be housed in one location. So that's what led me to start an investigation of blockchain. But as I got involved in it, there are so many other uses that credentialing is just one small component in the use of it. As an aside, though, MIT has just begun to offer blockchain diplomas so that there won't be a registrar for their diploma, each individual will be their own registrar. And one of the terms that's coming out right now is to be a lifelong personal registrar, where you keep track of everything that you take that's for credit, not for credit. So I thought libraries needed to have a role in this, to have a seat at the table at least for blockchain, and that's what led me to start the investigation. Kristen?
Thanks, Sue. So with my situation, as I mentioned, there was a very interested party in terms of thinking about grants that I had approached the school. But when I thought about his ideas and his experience with the TV white space technology and just networking technology in general, the factors that I considered in terms of my decision to develop a research grant proposal was whether I thought that the project would be competitive. That was a big consideration. That was a big factor. So whether I thought that IMLS would be likely to invest in this technology was one factor. I wanted to consider also whether my background would be a good match for the technology in terms of, again, being competitive. So all of my doctoral research was doing community-based technology integration. And so I had a long background in terms of taking new forms of technology and implementing them at the community level. And so I thought that there was a good match in terms of TV white space. Even though I didn't have a background in this specific networking technology, I had a background in other technologies. And so I thought that from that standpoint, I could write something that would be competitive. And so those factors in terms of whether I thought that the technology would be something that that IMLS would want to invest in, whether I had the background that would match well with IMLS's goals. And I think finally whether I could gather partners, again, that would be attractive to IMLS. So those are the factors that help me, because you're spending so much time to develop not only the full proposal if you get that far, but the preliminary proposal takes quite a bit of time as well. So you have to make that determination in terms of whether it'll be worth the effort, because it is quite a bit of effort. And so you have to, I think, weigh whether what you're doing would be attractive. And so right now we have extended the current grant to 3 new grant applications, and I'm not sure how much IMLS will want to invest in this technology, but we've brought in new partners with different competencies and different skills and different approaches. Instead of doing a grant project proposal, one of our proposals is a research proposal, which brings in computer science expertise from UC Santa Barbara to do a network analysis of the different sites in various ways. So we're thinking about the technology in new ways. I don't know at this point what IMLS will want to invest, if they want to invest in addition to what they've done before. We'll just have to see. But those are the factors that influenced me. And I see Anthony had a question in the chat box. So in both grant projects, the proposals advance unique aspects of the projects, a leading role as seat at the table. Yeah, I think that there's definitely this aspect or this dimension of wanting libraries to lead, and they want projects that will make impact and promote leadership among libraries across the nation.
And I think to piggyback on Kristen, we applied for the Community Anchor program, and that's libraries leading, it's libraries taking that central role. And so that's what we're doing with the blockchain. Should we move on to the next question on what made your proposal successful?
Before we do that, I was just going to say that it's important to demonstrate how your program or your project is unique, the unique contribution it will make to the field. That's a very different way of approaching a grant than saying that I'm an expert in this. This is an interesting area to me. Please give me money to do it. Depending upon your audience, you've got to be able to pitch the idea and frame it and sort of tee it up based upon the goals of the granting institution. And that will make you more competitive than someone just saying, please give me money to do something I'm good at.
Yes, yes, I agree with that 100%.
Me too.
Sue, why don't you pick up? Thanks.
Okay. Our proposal was successful because of the advisory committee, their support for it. It was across the profession in all different types of organizations, and blockchain is an unknown. We didn't want to just have the profession move ahead without taking a thorough investigation of the pros and cons of using it. And IMLS was fully behind our investigations, saying we might find that blockchain is not the way to go, that it's a new technology, but it's unproven. We shouldn't invest in it. But this is an investigation that is a national discussion, or we're enabling it to be a national discussion through our website, blog, the Library 2.0 conference. There will be a survey at the end of that, and then the national forum, which will also be live streamed to have anybody who wants to become involved and say, yes, these are the directions that libraries should take with blockchain. These are the cautions that we should be aware of, and we are trying to bring in skeptics as well as proponents of blockchain. So I think that's what made it successful. It's an unknown, and we had a very visible advisory group. Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay, so in terms of thinking about why the project or the proposal was successful, I think that it was successful primarily because it had a topic, and in this case, a technology that was building steam in other subfields or other fields. And so you had sort of a consensus that this was a technology that would be explored and had already been explored in computer science contexts. And so this would be an application of something, of a technology that was already gaining steam. I think it also was successful because it addressed a core issue within library and information science, which is digital equity, access, and inclusion. And so it was very easy to tie the adoption path of this technology to goals, as I said, for information access, goals for libraries playing the role as community anchor. Even though when we applied for this grant, the community anchors area was not announced as of yet, but community anchor roles were a big part of our proposal. I think also that our proposal was successful because we had strategic partners. And finally, the thing that had impact on the proposal was that TV Whitespace had been funded by other agencies like Knight Foundation. And in fact, with our latest grant, it builds upon not only this grant and the Knight Foundation grants, but 2 NSF grants. So I find that IMLS generally likes the idea of building upon prior research. So if you can use an internal SJSU grant as a first step and then build upon that, then IMLS sees that there's a trend of interest in the topic area or the setting that you're wanting to study. And and one other thing that I think made it successful was that we were interested in working in rural contexts or in tribal contexts, and IMLS has a big commitment to funding technology integration in sovereign nations or tribal contexts. And so that was our interest in that was definitely, I think, a factor that made our proposal successful. So do you want to go on to the third question?
Before you do, I wanted to just suggest that we're about halfway done, just to give a sense that how much time we have left. It's important, I think, to note that in both of these particular grant projects, we're talking about the introduction, examination, and exploration of new technologies into the field. And so I think that is important. That's not always the only obviously the only criteria introducing new technology that can make successful and competitive grant proposals. There are other ways too, but these two happen to have those that in common. The next question, what resources do you need or use, is really important for, particularly for Lily and myself as co-chairs of the Faculty Research Committee, because we're constantly looking for ways that we can identify to support a faculty from developing interest in pursuing competitive grants. So it's an important question. So Sue, do you want to take it up?
Sure. I was going to respond to the next two questions together. But the resources that I need for this particular grant are personal contacts and those with other areas of expertise who are familiar with the needs in the field, or with people who might be willing to help us. So for this particular grant, the resources were the personal contacts. If I were going to be doing a new grant, it would really depend on what the topic would be as far as resources. But I think just having the experience of other people who have worked within the university to know what to do. And that leads me into what campus university supports have been helpful. You have to go through the SJSU Research Foundation. There's no way around it if you're getting any kind of a grant. And they help you navigate the policies and procedures imposed by the foundation. But as far as actual help for the grant or the project, that doesn't seem to be their role. So I can be more detailed, but I think that suffices it to say that it really depends on the topic, on the type of resources that are needed. So I'll pass it over to you, Kristen.
Kristen, before you pick up the mic, Anne, would you mind go into a little bit of discussion about the role that the foundation does play? In my own IMLS experience with the University Foundation, at least at that time, a few years ago, it was very frustrating to work with them. It was harder to work with them than it was the federal government. I'm hoping that may have changed a little bit, but I didn't see a lot of support coming from them. In fact, I actually, to be quite frank, felt that their view was that I was working for them. And I'm just curious if you had similar, or Kristen, if you had a similar experience.
I definitely think that obviously every time you're going for a federal grant, then the research foundation is involved. I think that there are some challenges associated with working with the research foundation in terms of, especially if you're working at a distance, and most of us are, to keep up to date with who is currently in what role, and whether that person is aware of where you are in your timeline for your grant. And I think that if you are trying to achieve certain dates and need to get something done, then you have to really lead in that space with the Research Foundation folks to make sure that your project gets submitted correctly, and make sure that in their systems, because you may not have the view of that they do in terms of the submission system. You have to make sure, okay, did it get submitted? Were there any warning signs coming from the system that meant that things needed to be modified and then resubmitted? So there are a lot of steps that it's good if you take a lot of initiative in terms of making sure that things are running smoothly. Don't be afraid that you're bugging them or that you're being pesky. Just communicate with them and say, I'm not sure about this. Did this get submitted? Where are we on this? And I found that if you keep asking questions, then they'll be forthcoming. But there could be a vacuum or a space if there isn't a lot of initiative on the part of the faculty member. That's all I'm going to say about the Research Foundation. You just kind of keep after them, make sure that they're busy. They really want to. I think there's a lot of positive motivation on their part to be really helpful, but they're busy just like we are, and so you just kind of have to keep your hand in the, in their cookie jar, and keep stirring the pot with them, and make sure that they know that you're around and that you're interested in the process and what's going on. When you think about supports from them, I mean, you need them. They're a key support. You can't submit without them. What Sue noted in terms of network, like a network to help you build a proposal, is really important. That is a resource. And when Sandy goes to conferences, people are always swarming around her and saying, Sandy, I want to do this. Listen to my idea. And so there are key people that really want to work with us. We may not know about that unless they're really aggressive. So maybe there's a space there for our faculty to do more to operationalize those people that have expressed interest in working with our faculty. So I think that's an important thing. Another important thing in terms of thinking about resources is when you're building your proposal and you're building a budget for your proposal, you have to understand how the university allocates resources toward projects. And so they have their own indirect costs of 26%. And so that's something that you have to understand how not only resources for yourself, but how resources are leveraged by the university, and how partnerships are structured financially in terms of, so you have these partners, how do they get paid, and how does that work, and how do you express that in your proposal? So resources are really important, not just resources for you and what you need, but how to express how resources are leveraged within the university, within the Research Foundation, and so that IMLS understands and thinks that your project is something that's viable and will work.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially with the financial resources, because you have to be very aware of we're bringing people in, we're having events. It would have been much more expensive for us to hold these events on our own campus than 2 miles away. So you have to be aware of what the costs are in advance, so that can be reflected in your budget. Anthony, I think we're ready to move on if you are.
Totally am.
Okay, then what do you find are the benefits for pursuing or receiving a research grant? I think it is, for me, the benefits to learn to know more individuals and to make them aware of our school, our faculty, our students. That's a positive. And in receiving the research grant, we've been contacted by people and organizations that I never knew existed. There are people out there who gets the IMLS grants. They read the publicity that other news organizations promote about it. And so it's a great opportunity for networking, for extending the networking, and really making our school more visible in a wider scope. I also find it very personally rewarding to be able to make a contribution to the profession, whether we recommend to move forward with blockchain or not. But every time that I've had a research grant over the years, the benefits for the results of the project are what motivated me to continue on. And I think it'll be the same case with this. Kristen?
I think that the benefits for me in receiving the grant has been the ability to make a difference in terms of supporting communities that really struggle with access to the internet and just digital access in general. And so I'm really committed to issues of information equity, access and inclusion. And so to me, the grant has opened up a new world of addressing those goals in a broader context with the ability to make positive changes in communities or understand how those issues can be addressed in strategic ways. So to me, that has been the benefit. And I've met a lot of like-minded people that are really interested in pursuing these types of issues. So to me, there's been a real like personal gratification in terms of taking I have like the goals for equity and inclusion and access, and you can do those, address those issues on a really small scale. But the grant really improves and maximizes your reach in really important ways. And so to me, that's been the core benefit. Do you want us to jump into liabilities?
Sure. And then after we do that, we can open up for free flow or other questions. Also, people feel free to nominate questions in the chat room. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, or Sue, do you want to just go into?
No, go ahead. Take the floor.
I was just going to continue along those lines with liabilities. The only liability I found is that there are constraints associated with working in a teaching institution. I mean, we have a lot of teaching and service responsibilities, and so even when you budget in a course release, there are a lot of competing responsibilities that faculty face. And so I guess the drawback is that when you jump into or you dip your toe into the grant pool, the management of the grant itself and making sure everybody gets paid and all of these things and making sure that the funds are allocated appropriately, that's not to be underestimated, the time commitment to that. And a course release doesn't really capture the intense responsibilities that you take on with a grant. And so I think that managing that and being successful at it is a challenge for sure. And I guess that's the only thing that I wanted to raise in terms of drawbacks of doing it. It can be a time suck if it doesn't get funded, for sure.
Before we go on to Anne, Kristen, I wanted to ask you, to what degree did you find our own iSchool staff supportive in those roles? I remember in my own grant, we had our accounting staff that took care of at least tracking when partners would be compensated and so on. That didn't necessarily fall to me. So I'm curious if that is still true. And
it might just be how I work, but I don't think that it's necessarily that they're unwilling. It's just sort of, I guess it feels to me like it's my job to manage the grant. I wouldn't. Well,
that could be a question we could ask. I mean, to what degree is that available to us?
Well, right. It's available if you put it into the grant, into the budget.
Very good.
So you need to be able to determine in advance how much time, because I had done that originally to get help from two different staff members, and it's certainly doable, but you have to know their hourly rate, you have to know the direct costs, the indirect costs for them and their benefits. So yes, if you have a grant that will allow you to have that luxury of paying for staff, then you can do that. But I did not do that. And I'm with Kristen. The time is incredible for making sure that you follow all the guidelines and policies and procedures of the Research Foundation, that you have to have every single I dotted and T crossed, bringing in each individual person to the conference, the forms that need to be filled out. It really sucks into the time that you can spend or that you had allocated to spend on the actual project.
In a way, you become really the overall project manager rather than the actual researcher. A lot of the research questions and setting up and how data will be collected and analyzed and so forth happens prior. At least you anticipate those steps. But once the project begins, you really do become more of a manager in that regard. But would either of you, were you to start again, lean a little bit more heavily on some of the iSchool staff, or would you prefer to continue working the way you do in that way?
I think that for me, I would continue to do it the way that I did it before, because I wouldn't, I mean, it depends on if you're, for IMLS, you begin a cost share scenario when you go beyond a $250,000 project. So if I was going to hire staff to help me, that would really, really cut into the amount that I could allocate toward uh, the technology integration component, like equipment and things like that. So you just have to weigh it and I think you just get better at it if you do it again. Once you go through it once, then you understand a lot more. And so we learn quickly. So I wouldn't necessarily write the staff into that. And I haven't so far with new proposals.
And I think that's important what Kristen said. If you go beyond that $250,000 for IMLS and you start to cost share, then you would have to negotiate with our iSchool administration to see if staff could be part of that cost share. But you still have to oversee things. There's nobody that's going to take that role away from the person who's gained the grant. But I would like to go to your question that you put in the chat, Anthony. I have used our iSchool students. I got them for a $298, and they developed the whole blockchain website and developed the blog. And Bob Lucor, who is a consultant for the school, between the students and Bob, it was fabulous support. So the students stayed for the fall term, the spring term, and now they're going to be able to give a presentation at the Library 2.0 conference and contribute to a chapter in a book that Sandy and I are writing about blockchain. So we are really thrilled with our iSchool student support. Kristen?
Before you pick up the mic, I wanted to suggest that your reference to 298 is an info 298. It's a class. It's the sort of our equivalent to an independent study.
Right.
I wanted to clarify that. Kristen.
Yeah, I think I mentioned, I addressed the issue with liabilities. I don't know if we want to open it up to questions.
I wanted to, while we're waiting for another question perhaps to develop, I wanted to advocate the idea of serving as a grant proposal reviewer, either on campus for any SJSU grant experience or certainly at the federal level for IMLS. It's a really good way to see that how the nuts and bolts of successful and competitive projects are assembled. You can see all the moving parts. You get lots of really good quality, high quality discussion with other people reviewing when you're trying to make final decisions. It's a very good experience all by itself, but if you're ever interested in thinking about developing your own, it's a really good way to see how all those things come together. Are there other questions and comments either about these two projects or generally about grants? I think, Sue, you mentioned in terms of resources the importance of finding partners or contacts for potential partners. That might be something useful to spend a minute looking at. I've always advocated drafting a letter of support from someone as I ask them to participate, so that they get a chance to see what my view of their role would be, and then they can better calibrate whether they are interested in participating or not. And then they revise that letter to the degree that they feel that they want to, if they're going to continue to participate or have a better idea about why they can't. But how about other dimensions of recruiting and assembling a research team or partners?
Well, I was noticing that Ruth had a question in the chat box.
Well, here, let me just address Anthony very quickly. I do the same thing, and I start with a literature review to see who's involved in that area if I don't know them already. And then ask them for suggestions so that it multiplies, almost the snowball effect, as you move along. And really surprising places that it's taken me. And among our own faculty have made fabulous suggestions of people that I didn't even find in the literature that are doing so much. So I think it's all about networking. So Ruth, I'm trying to.
Sure.
read
I've
this.
turned on my mic.
Okay.
What I was interested in is I would be interested in working on a grant that would combine maybe a private donor or foundation out there that's really focused on a very narrow topic, and how that might be partnered with IMLS funding and structure. And with that, you know, might be able to tap onto something larger. Has there been anything like that? Or I haven't even done any homework, but I'd be totally interested in kind of nailing down something along those lines.
Gee, off the top of my head, I don't think so, but I'm not an expert to say that that's really true. I might be more inclined to have a two-part to the research proposal and say to IMLS, will you fund me for this part? And then I have been working with this private donor foundation
Right.
on this next part.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
that in my situation, when by the time I went after the IMLS grant, there had been an early pilot that was funded by the Knight Foundation. And so the foundation funding was used as a stepping stone to the federal funding.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and
And
I've
so
seen
you
that
can,
before too. Yeah.
you can start with a small, really directed, structured project, even if it's small, with a private donor with a niche kind of interest,
Yeah.
and then use that as a stepping stone, because then IMLS said, oh, well, that foundation liked it, you know, and they did a good job with that project. And so then you're providing a rationale about why IMLS might build upon that work. And so you can argue for a trajectory of the project or setting that you're working in. I mean, that's how I would do it.
Yeah. Good idea.
I would
Okay.
imagine there would be a couple of ways to think about that. One would be sort of looking to build upon a previous interest demonstrated or promised by a private donor or foundation. So that's one way. Another way might be to include that private donor or foundation as a partner in the project, which would help strengthen the persuasive nature to a committee at IMLS. But I think the bigger issue, people were talking about the role of the program officers at IMLS, and I'm wondering if that might not be a good way to, on a positive note, actually end some of our discussion here today, because they play very strong roles in helping shape and form and revise and make competitive projects. So if maybe we could spend another minute or two, both of you, on that.
We definitely got positive feedback from our grant officer at IMLS after the preliminary proposal. They generally meet with those that have been, not meet, but, you know, have a phone call with projects or individuals, you know, PIs that are looking to prepare full proposals. And they go over, you know, they usually provide some sort of feedback from the peer review and how to focus your proposal so that it will meet the goals of the organization. And so I would say really positive things about IMLS. I also found that when I've gone to conferences, IMLS officers have attended my presentations, and so I've gotten some good feedback and positive reinforcement from them. So IMLS has been really great.
Yeah, my experience has been the same with the IMLS program officers. They come to the conference. They're coming out to the national forum. They made suggestions. They gave ideas on who to contact. So it's been really good. But I would really like to hear Lily talk about the SJSU Tower Foundation if we have time.
Sure. First of all, I just wanted to say that my experience with IMLS officers was actually not that positive. Last year, I submitted a preliminary proposal, and I was trying very desperately to get a hold of the program officer. I sent her emails 3 times. She never responded. She responded once, and then I followed up, and she never responded. And then we were very close to the deadline, and I just couldn't do anything but submitting my proposal, and it was rejected. So I just wanted to offer that as a, as a different perspective from the positive experience that you all had. But anyways,
Lily, you know, some of my partners are so pesky, they go after these grant officers in person at conferences. That's so not my style, but I think maybe I've been building upon their annoyingness at conferences, and so I've been the beneficiary of them being such a pain to IMLS folks. But I haven't tried to email them with ideas prior to the preliminary proposal being accepted. And so I can't speak to whether it was, you know, they might not have replied to me either if I had tried that.
oh, okay.
Lily, why
Well,
don't you wrap up your comments that you were going to address with the Tower Foundation people, and then why don't you close the session?
Yeah, sure. The Tower Foundation is a little different from the San Jose University Research Foundation because their responsibility is to help out with faculty members who are seeking funding from private organizations, private associations. And the Research Foundation is responsible for helping out with seeking a grant from government funders. So I just wanted to point that out. If you are interested in seeking funding from a private organization, please contact Tower Foundation, and they are also very responsive, just like people from the Research Foundation at SJSU.
Thanks, Lily. That's really great information.
All right, Anthony, do you have any final comment?
No, I'm glad that we had such a rich conversation. I want to certainly thank Kristen and Sue for helping us today with some really good crunchy level detail. These are step-by-step kinds of things that are required when you're proposing and developing and maturing an idea, but there are steps and there are resources. We're going to be continuing probably doing this on a more same informal basis probably for the fall. So we might see some of you back then. We may even have a couple of the new grant recipients to be able to share their experience with us. Lily, what do you have anything more do you want to add?
Sure. I just wanted to say that thank you all for coming, and thank you very much, Sue and Kristen, for being part of the conversation, providing us with such wonderful input. And for future sessions like the one we're having today, if you have any topics that you would like us to cover, please feel free to propose them. I think we're gonna probably, what we can do is to send out a call for topic proposals, right, for us to cover in sessions like this, so that we can have meaningful and engaging discussions about. So just keep that in mind. Thank you.
maybe we can collaborate and make it a T3 too.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much, Lily and Anthony, for inviting us.
All right, thank you. I guess this means I can stop the recording.